Hello everybody, my name is Shay and this is RTFM, the show where I teach you how to play a game, an expansion to a game, or today, the extra modules that come with the base game. Today we're looking at Anachrony, which has a number of little things you can add to your game after you've learned the basics. There are a few quick additions to change your starting setup, there's a whole expansion size module to add to the game, and there's a dedicated solo mode as well. So let's jump into it and learn how to play all of the additional game modes of Anachrony. Alright, so let's start with some easy stuff. At the beginning of the game, instead of taking your path-specific starting assets, you can do a starting asset draft. First, everyone starts with 2 active scientists, 1 active engineer, 2 power cores, and 2 water. Then deal out these starting asset cards. If you're playing with 4 players, deal out 4 cards each, 5 cards for 3 players, and 8 cards for 2 players. These cards show assets and a number. We'll get to the number in a second. Every player secretly chooses 1 card and passes their hand to the right. Keep doing this until each player has 4 cards and discard the rest if there are any. Receive all the assets shown on your cards, then add up the numbers at the bottom. Whoever has the lowest total sum will be the first player, or if there's a tie, whoever has the lowest numbered card among the tied players. Similar to the starting asset draft, you can also draft the endgame scoring cards. Instead of selecting them randomly, deal 2 cards to each player if playing with 3 or 4 people, or 4 cards in a 2-player game. Instead of passing the cards around, each player will pick half of the cards they're holding and put them down simultaneously. So 1 card for 3 or 4 players, 2 cards for 2 players. Then from the undealt cards, draw 1 or 2 cards so that you'll end up with 5 total. It's kind of a convoluted way to get to the same place, but if you have certain things that you like to go for, this might help you guide the game in that direction. Lastly, we have the alternate timeline. After setting up your timeline, flip over each tile to its alternate side. Now, instead of the timeline simply acting as a placeholder for your warp tiles, it gives you a little strategic twist. After revealing warp tiles, place them on the timeline in turn order. As you can see, each timeline is different and has spaces that will grant bonuses or penalties. This space, for example, will grant double of whatever asset is on the warp tile you place here, whereas this one will instantly give you a paradox token. There's an appendix that'll tell you what each symbol means, but they're pretty self-explanatory. The real strategy here is now about guessing how much your opponents will ask for and how to balance your own requests in that light. Okay, that's enough of the easy stuff. Let's look at something a little heavier. So let's say the end of the world is just a little too predictable for you. Well, in that case, you might want to add the Doomsday Module. This will have you and the other players competing for control of the meteor itself, either hastening its approach or holding it off, potentially stopping it altogether. So let's see how it works. First off, the impact will now go after the 5th timeline space instead of the 4th. You'll see why in a bit. Then take these new experiment cards and randomly put level 1 cards below each timeline, revealing the first one just like the super projects. Next, we place the Doomsday board nearby with some special dice and these 2 markers at the center of this track. After that, shuffle all the level 2 experiment cards and keep them nearby. And lastly, before choosing endgame condition cards, add the most completed experiments card to the deck. So, what is this all about? Well, as you can see, each path is represented on this track, which refers to their philosophy towards the impact, whether they want to stop it or bring it forth. Players will be able to affect the outcome by completing these experiment cards. The way you do that is through the new experiment action. When you send a worker here, you can complete an experiment card, provided that it is in focus, you meet the experiment's condition, and you are able to pay its cost. For example, if you want to achieve this technological singularity, you'll need to have built at least 1 power plant and 1 factory, and then you need to pay 2 water. Remove the card from the timeline and keep it nearby. It'll be worth points at the end of the game. And then move one of the 2 trackers. If you're playing Harmony or Dominance, move the Save Earth tracker up 1 space. If you're playing Salvation or Progress, move the Seal Fate tracker down 1 space. You might also earn extra points, again depending on your path. If I'm playing the Dominance path, the first 4 times I move up the track, I'll earn extra points. But if I'm playing Harmony, I'll only get points for the 4th and 5th move. And to get anything, you have to be the one moving the token. Slight caveat though, if either marker has reached the end of its track, neither can be moved again, though experiments can still be achieved for points. Looking back at the timeline, you're going to reveal the next experiment card during the preparation phase, just like super projects. Unlike super projects though, you'll also refill any empty spaces with new cards, this time from the level 2 experiment deck. These are worth an extra point, but they're also a lot more costly. Or there's an optional rule here called planned experiments. If you play this way, keep the level 2 cards in a face-up deck nearby, and as soon as an experiment is completed, immediately replace it with the next level 2 card. Lastly, we have what this whole game mode is about, changing the future. During the cleanup phase, when checking for impact, first roll the 2 dice and count the total number of pluses and minuses. If they end up the same, nothing changes. If the result is positive, move the impact tile 1 space back, unless it's already at the end. If the result is negative, move the impact one space forward, potentially triggering the impact early. You'll also include the symbols on the Doomsday track. So if the board looks like this, you'll have 2 extra pluses and 1 extra minus. However, if either tracker is at the end of the line, you won't roll at all. If Earth's fate is sealed, regardless of where the impact tile is, the impact will happen at the end of the round. On the other side, if the Earth is saved, that means the impact will never happen, and at the end of the round, the game will end, which also means that there won't be any evacuation, so plan accordingly. And that's all you need to know for the Doomsday Module. But if you're like me, you don't always have another person around to play with. Luckily, Anachrony comes with a fully fledged solo mode, so let's learn how to play with a Chronobot. Anachrony comes with an AI opponent that you can play against in solo mode. You have to use just the base game, but it plays a fair bit differently, so let's take a look. First off, grab the Chronobot player board and give it 6 exosuits and 8 warp tiles. It doesn't get any starting assets or workers, but it does get these numbered tokens that you'll place on the indicated spaces. You won't play with endgame scoring cards, but you can play with either the A or B side of your player board. And lastly, the Chronobot will go first, so give yourself an extra water. Now let's look at how most of the phases are a little different, starting with the warp phase. Instead of choosing, Chronobot rolls the paradox die and adds that many warp tiles to the timeline. Chronobot doesn't gain anything for these tiles though. During the paradox phase, Chronobot will always roll last, and if it gains an anomaly, remove a warp tile from the timeline with the most warps, the oldest one if tied. And since Chronobot doesn't have building rows like you do, the anomaly will go here. If it already has 3 anomalies, it doesn't remove any warp tiles or gain new anomalies, but the paradoxes still clear off. During the power-up phase, Chronobot powers up 6 exosuits during the pre-impact rounds and 4 in the post-impact rounds. It never gains nor spends energy cores, for it is Chronobot, powered by Kronos himself. And next, we have the action phase, which is where the big differences lie. On its turn, roll this die and perform the action connected to the token with that number. Then advance the token to the next position, following these arrows. Then, if there are 3 tokens in the same position, move the highest numbered one to the next spot. If the Chronobot can't perform the action, you still advance the token and it receives 2 water and 1 victory point instead. Now, a few things to keep in mind before we look at the actions. First off, Chronobot doesn't use workers. It just sends the empty exosuits to the action space. Second, it doesn't ever pay for things, and it ignores anything printed on the action spaces, including collapsing capital tiles. And third, Chronobot always takes the topmost space for capital actions, or if there are no spaces left, it takes a World Council space, the first player space if possible. When Chronobot constructs, it goes for a specific building type. Take whichever building is worth more VPs, or from the secondary stack if tied, and place it in the appropriate space. If there are already 3 buildings in that stack, Chronobot can't take the action, so it gets the 2 water and 1 VP, but it still places the exosuit to block the space. If the impact hasn't occurred yet, this action simply gives it a victory point, but if it has, Chronobot can start building super projects. Place an exosuit on the construct action and take the highest VP value super project regardless of focus, placing it here, following the same limit as building tiles, except it can only hold 2 super projects. When Chronobot recruits, take an available worker that it doesn't already have, following this priority order from left to right. If it already has everything on offer, it still takes a worker following that priority and stacks it on top of the old one. Once it has at least 1 of each worker, discard those 4 and give Chronobot 5 victory points. This action is supply or recruit. If it has the water, it pays to raise its morale tracker 1 space. If not, it takes a recruit action. Chronobot also mines in the same way it recruits, taking resources it doesn't have, following the same left to right priority, and when it gets all 4, discard them for 5 VPs. Chronobot will research, even though it doesn't really do anything with these tiles. Just roll the shape die and take any breakthrough matching the shape that it rolled. It doesn't need these for super projects, so it'll just collect them for the endgame points. The time travel action allows Chronobot to remove a warp tile from the most gunked up timeline, oldest if tied, and advance its time travel marker. And lastly, this action allows Chronobot to remove an anomaly, paying 2 water and 2 of whatever resource it has the most of, following the reverse of its mining priority for ties, with 1 neutronium counting as 2 resources each. So here it would pay 2 gold. Once Chronobot has run out of exosuits, it takes a time travel action on its next turn, if able, and then passes. Or if the player passes first, the round immediately ends. The game ends using normal endgame conditions, but don't subtract any points for Chronobot's leftover warp tiles. Otherwise, you score normally. And that's how you play the solo version of Anachrony, along with all the extra content included in the base game. If you're a rules lawyer watching this a month before everyone else, thank you so much for supporting the channel. If not, did you know that you can do that? Because you totally can. Head on over to the Patreon and pledge a few bucks for early access to expansion tutorials, strategy videos, and polls that tell me what games I should teach next. It's a pretty cool thing to do. Bye.